If you have to roll a 2+ to charge, don't roll a 1.
Please consider being a Patreon of mine. All YouTube ads that I can control have been turned off to ensure your viewing experience is as uninterrupted as possible. Thank you.
Hey guys, what's up? Let's go over charging in Conquest. First, I will demonstrate how charging works in Conquest without going over the rules, and then I will break down each step so you can better understand how charging works in the Conquest. The Ogres are my charging regiment, and the Bowchosen are my target regiment. See if I'm within range, roll some dice. I am within range. First wheel, move forward. Second wheel, and charging is done. Looks simple, right? Well, let's break down what exactly happened in all these steps. Check for line of sight and front arc. Remember that the front arc is checked from the charging regiment. I'm using these red lasers to show you that the Bowchosen are, in fact, in my front arc. Great. Now we're going to check line of sight, the center of any one of my stands in the front facing of the regiment against the center of any one of the stands on any facing of the target regiment. I'll take the bottom Ogre stand to check against the center Bowchosen stand, and there is no obstructing terrain or regiments in between us, so the target regiment is in my line of sight. Now we're going to check to see what facing of the target regiment I am currently in. We're going to take the lasers and do a little check. There we go. As you can see, the majority of the stands in the charging regiment are in the front arc of the target regiment. So the final position of the charge must be in contact with the front facing of the target regiment. It cannot be in the flank or the rear. Now, if the check for the side of the regiment that I can charge into is thusly, you can see that the majority of the stands in the charging regiment are in the side facing. So the final position of the charging regiment must be in the side facing. Once you have a line of sight and you've established that the target regiment is in your front arc and you have established which facing of the target regiment you are allowed to charge into, now you can start the charge. What you're going to do is take the march characteristic of the Ogres and roll a d6 and add the result to the march characteristic. So in this example, I rolled the 3. This is called the charge distance. We have currently a 9 for our charge distance. So what I'm going to do now is measure to see if I'm within 9 inches. I am within 7 inches. So since I am within 9 inches, the charge is legal. If my charge distance is a 9, but the enemy regiment is beyond 9 inches, then the charge is a fail. You take the result of the dice that you rolled, and the charging regiment, the Ogres, move directly forward a distance equal to the dice rolled. So it's a 3. So we're going to move 3, and then the Ogres activation ends immediately. Even if the Ogres have a second activation afterwards, the Ogres are done activating, and then your opponent goes to their next command card. Here, we have determined that the target regiment is within charge distance of the charging regiment. Now you can make a free wheel, so the charging regiment has to engage as many individual stands in the target regiment as possible on a stand to stand basis. For example, imagine that these two regiments are flush and in contact. Hey kitty, I can't have you meowing, so I know, little blind cat, but you gotta go out. I love you, but you gotta go out. The bottom Ogre stand is in contact with the bottom Bowchosen stand and the middle Bowchosen stand. Remember, contact is touching any facing of one stand to another facing of another stand, and corner to corner contact. So we have an engagement of 2 for the bottom Ogre stand. The center Ogre stand has an engagement of 1, 2, 3. So we'll put a 3 right there. And the top Ogre stand has an engagement of 1 and 2. So the max engaged stands we have is 7 between these two regiments. Since you know that 7 is the maximum engagement possible, before you do that free wheel for your charge, the choice of where this regiment goes after the charge move is not in your hands. Now, basically, the rules act as the brain and you act as the muscle. You must now follow the rules precisely to get maximum engaged amount of stands. The free wheel that you do at the start of a charge move, its only function is to maximize stand engagement. So you cannot freewheel to end up like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. You can only ever end up like this in the context of the current state of the game. Many people have issues actually performing a wheel, as when they try to wheel, they either float the regiment. There's a simple trick to make sure that you can never fail at wheeling. And this also helps your opponent make sure that you're not floating the regiment as you wheel. The Ogres have a command card that you drew for them to activate. So what we're going to do is take their command card and put it against the side of the regiment that you're going to be wheeling with, corner to corner. Then you just take a second card and line it up. Even if you remove the regiment and move it about, you know its position exactly. Corner goes to the corner of the cards, and the side is flush with the card. When the wheel allows you to go up to 90 degrees, the most you can go is flush with the second card, staying corner to corner between both cards. So a wheel on this pivot point will look like this. And you see, as I'm wheeling, I'm kind of floating the corner. This is a way of precisely making sure you keep your corner exactly where it is and that the regiment doesn't wheel more than 90 degrees. Let's reset the regiments. This part gets a little tricky at first. You basically want to line up the corners of the charging regiment with the corners of the target regiment in an example such as this. You want to wheel in such a way where the far corner of the charging regiment hits the far corner of the target regiment. And in this instance, I'm going to use a laser to line them up. Looks about right. Now I could remove the cards. The regiment now charges forward directly. Once you make contact with the target regiment, then you go to the next step, which is simply aligning the charge. That's the basics of charging. Let's go over some corner cases for charging that might come up. In this example, I have a friendly Uger regiment, a friendly Fenrir regiment, and an enemy Bow-Chosen regiment. My Ugers want to charge the Bow-Chosen, but the Fenrir are in the way. I want to see if the target regiment is in the front arc of the Ugers. We're going to find those lines. The Bow-Chosen are clearly within the front arc of the Ugers. Now we're going to check line of sight. Because the Fenrir are size 2 and the Ugers are size 2 and the target regiment is size 1, the Uger stands cannot see over the Fenrir stands. If the Fenrir stands were size 1, then the Ugers could see right over them just fine. But in this example, the Fenrirs are size 2. That means when you attempt to draw line of sight from the center of one of your stands to the center of any one of the target stands, you need that line to be able to not cross over the Fenrir regiment. So this Uger on the top cannot do it. This Uger stand in the center cannot do it either, going from center to center. The Uger stand at the bottom actually can. The Uger stand at the bottom can see the center stand and the bottom stand. So because at least one of the Uger's stand can see at least one of the target regiment's stand, the entire regiment is within the Uger's line of sight. Since we've met the requirements for front arc and line of sight, the Ugers may now initiate a charge. The Ugers are going to roll a dice, and do not worry about the distance here, but we're going to say that the Ugers need a 3 or higher to get into contact with the target regiment. So if I had rolled a 3 or higher, I simply pick the Uger up and put them against the target regiment. In this example, you can see there would be a little bit of wheeling going on here. Don't worry, a regiment's position is not checked by the game state until the regiment is done with its 2 activations, or if a regiment is done with its charge move. So you can go ahead and wheel and hover over the other regiment just fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 2 cards, place them right here on the edge, and I'm going to go over the regiment, trying to keep the corner here as much as I can. On the camera, the angle is off, so you're going to see it as off center, but it's actually directly over. I'm going to line up this corner with this corner, move it forward, and then align the charge. Now, once you get used to the game and a situation like this arises where there's nothing else blocking your charge, you've successfully charged past your regiment, you could just pick up your regiment and place it face to face. There's no issues here. Kind of simple to do. Let's say I had rolled a 2 for my charge. The Ugers fail their charge. Remember, the Ugers needed a 3 to make it to the target regiment. But since I rolled a 2, the Ugers actually failed. So I'm going to measure 2, and 2 inches is on top of the Fenrir. Since you cannot have this state in the game where one regiment is on top of another, once again on the camera you really can't see it, but let's say just like that. The rules for charging state this. You take the charging regiment that failed its charge and moved directly forward 2 inches. You place it back at the closest legal position and in a legal formation. So the Uger regiment is going to be in contact with the Fenrir in the back, and then both regiments that had contact are now broken. So let's just use a 1 here to denote a broken regiment and a broken regiment. And since this charge failed for the Ogres, their activation is over, and now I have 2 broken regiments. In this example, we have the friendly Ogre regiment, we have an enemy Fenrir regiment, and an enemy Bowchosen regiment. And I want to charge the enemy Bowchosen regiment. So what I'm going to do is check line of sight, which I have, check the front arc, which the Bowchosen are in, and check what facing of the Bowchosen my Ogres are in. The Bowchosen's front facing. So my Ogre's final position would have to be in contact right here to maximize stands. There's an issue though. There's an enemy regiment in the way. The following rules are going to apply to enemy regiments, impassable terrain, and garrison terrain. During a charge move, the Ogres cannot pass over the enemy regiment, or impassable terrain, or garrison terrain. From this point on, whenever I mentioned enemy regiment, also assume I'm talking about impassable terrain and garrison terrain. Since the Ogres cannot march directly over the Fenrir, that means the state of the game requires that maximum engaged stands are going to be over here somewhere. This is the part of the game where a lot of new players get tripped up. Let's say the Ogres needed a 6 to make the charge, and they rolled a 6. So the charge is successful. We're going to take 2 cards, place them on the corner, and we're going to attempt to see if the Ogre's regiment can fit between the Fenrir corner and the corner of the card. And no matter how I do it, they cannot. You see, I'm hitting the Fenrir regiment, which basically means the Ogre cannot charge the Bowchosen as a legal charge. So here we have an issue, and the rules actually resolve this issue pretty clearly. If you're in this position where you don't know where the regiment is going to end up for maximum engaged stands, and you don't know if the Ogres are going to fit between the pivot point of your first free wheel and the corner of an enemy regiment, you're taking a chance. Why? Because you can't move this regiment unless you're actually doing the charge move. So you're taking a gamble. What does that mean? I go ahead and try to do the free wheel. I hit the Fenrir. So when I reach this game state right here, the charge is an automatic fail. So because the charge is an automatic fail, I'm going to move forward 6 inches as per the failed charge rules. But I'm already in contact with the Fenrir regiment, which means that as per the failed charge rules, the Ogres cannot be within an inch of an enemy regiment. In this instance, we're going to wheel the Ogres back, so the distance between both regiments is an inch, and that is the final position for the failed charge. In this example, once again, I've rolled a 6 to make the charge, and the Fenrir are still the enemy regiment. I am now going to use the free wheel to move past the Fenrir, right about there. Maximum stand engagement is going to be like this, where the stands line up in this particular order. Because here, this Ogre stand is engaged with 1, 2, 3 stands. This Ogre stand is engaged with 1, 2, and this Ogre stand is engaged with 1. So we have a total engagement of 6. Now, it is possible for me to have wheeled a little less, where I'll not line the stands up perfectly, and they'll be off-centered. So what I'm going to have here is this Ogre stand is engaged with 1, 2 enemy stands. This Ogre stand is engaged with 1, 2 enemy stands, and this Ogre stand is engaged with 1 enemy stand, and that's 5. So since 6 is possible, given the state of the game, this is not a legal charge. This is where you might see people slide the regiments over. Sliding does not exist in this game, but you have to make sure that during the movement of the wheeling and then the moving forward and closing the gate, that the state of the engagement is legal. So since I know that the state of the engagement, which is legal to maximize stands, is actually here, it's actually within the rules where you have to reposition the regiment to be right here. Now, you may also get the stand engagement right here, where you get maximum engagement. But because the Fenrir were in the way, and due to the angle of the charge, I could never get in there for that kind of engagement. So this is an impossible state of the game. So the maximum engagement for the current state of the game is right here. That's where the regiments have to end up. It's not your choice. So if you're playing the game and let's say you make a wheel, you move forward, then you align the charge, then you realize I could actually engage more stands, then just tell your opponent, I'm going to slide it over because during the charge, I could have wheeled a little further, see, without hitting the Fenrir, then moved directly forward and then align the charge where I have maximum engagement. This is a little tricky area in the game, but remember that once you charge, you have to wheel, move directly forward, and wheel a second time to get maximum engagement. And this is a state of the rules. Both you and your opponent have to abide by it. So your opponent may not like the fact that if I charge my Ogres here, then realize I could actually have maximum engagement right here and then slide it over. Your opponent may say, well, you can't slide it over. You have to inform them, well, technically I'm not sliding them over. What I'm actually doing is putting them back in their original position, wheeling them a little further, then moving them directly forward, and then closing the gate to maximize engagement, because this is the move I had to have done. Now, sometimes due to the positioning of intervening regiments or terrain, you are off-centered. So I am not saying sliding is legitimate in every state of the game or every charge that you make. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that sliding lets you achieve a legal required engagement instead of just putting your regiment back and then doing the whole thing over again. Now, if you're new to the game, I advise you to actually reset your regiment back to where the cards were and then try the charge again. I've been playing this game enough where I can pretty much eyeball the alignment of this side of the regiment with the corner of that stand while not hitting the Fenrir, so that when I go forward, I'll align perfectly. This all may seem a little confusing, but hopefully I have cleared up a little bit of charging confusions and helped you play Conquest charging correctly. But Diego, you didn't go over the two issues with charging. If you're new to the game, the next couple of examples may not be important to you right now. I would just learn the basic charging and master that. But let me go over two states of the game where the rules currently break down and do not work. The first one is what happens if you're trying to charge a regiment and you're attempting to ascertain which facing of the enemy regiment you are in, and you check. But the line that you check goes directly down the center of your regiment, meaning half the regiment is in the front and half the regiment is in the side of the target regiment. When choosing facing to line up against, right, you have to line up against the facing where you had the most stands. If the most stands are here, the bottom two, then I have to go into the side facing. If the most stands I have are right here, two on the top, then I have to line up with the front facing. But the rules actually do not state what happens when the facing is bisected 50% right down the middle, because the rules state you choose the side with the majority of the stands, and there is no majority here. So this is where the game actually hits a blue screen of death, where if you're playing a computer game and it crashes to the desktop, this is what happens. Technically, the game would end right here. You can't go any further. There's no other game state to move on from. But luckily, at the beginning of the book, if any issues in the game arises, you roll a dice. 1, 2, 3 in the side, 4, 5, 6 in the front. Now, as the attacker, I wanted the side, but that's how the dice is going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the front. Now, you may have just noticed in the previous example how when I charged in, I didn't align the Ogres up. I actually aligned the Fenrir up. Basically, let's go over the simple aspect of this. If the Ogres are right here, okay, let's say the Ogres are charging the Fenrir, and the Ogres are currently in the side arc of the Fenrir. It means I'm pivoting on this corner here. Pow, you stop. Some people will do this. You do not do that. That is not in the rule. It does not exist. You can only pivot when you wheel on your front corners. Pivoting in the center parts of the regiment's facings does not exist in the rules. But in aligning the charge, if the charging regiment cannot align flush with the target regiment, then the target regiment must then align flush with you. But here's the deal. Because I'm in the side arc of the Fenrir regiment, the Fenrir actually just wheels backwards. And we'll move the bow chosen out of the way. They're not really important at the moment, and that is the final charge appearance of how the two regiments are going to look. You may be wondering, didn't you just wheel backwards? Well, yes, wheeling in this game has no direction. You can wheel backwards and forwards. Now, when you wheel backwards, you go half march distance. So if the Ogres are 6, I can wheel forwards 6 inches, but I can only wheel backwards up to 3 inches. That's easy to remember. There are no restrictions for directional wheeling during aligning a charge for the target regiment. The only restriction for wheeling is for the charging regiment, and the charging regiment can only ever wheel forward. A charging regiment cannot wheel backwards. So if I make a charge in the side of of the Fenrir, the Ugrs cannot wheel any further. Now the Fenrir have to wheel. Remember, the Fenrir, the target regiment, has no restriction on wheeling direction. And since I have to be in the side of the Fenrir, this is not a legal wheel because the Ugrs cannot end in the front facing of the Fenrir. The Fenrir would actually wheel backwards. And that is how you properly align a charge. If the Ugrs were, let's say, in the front facing of the Fenrir, once again, my Ugrs, after wheeling, they end up in this position. They can't wheel any further. The Fenrir can now close the gate for the front arc. The final positioning has to be aligned on whatever side the charge is going to end up in. Sometimes it's in the front. Sometimes the target regiment has to wheel so you're in the side. Maybe a little confusing, but that's how the rules are currently written. I did state there were two issues with the rules where they break down. The first is when you can't decide which facing of the enemy regiment you're charging into, so you have to roll a dice to figure things out. The second issue comes up during the aligning to wheel section of the charge, and that issue pops up when you have this. And I will cover that conundrum in the next video. So thank you for watching, and remember, when you're trying to do a 2+ charge, don't roll a 1.